officers, members of the public, and anyone who is watching online as this meeting is being webcast. First of all, I have to outline the emergency evacuation procedure. So if the alarm sounds again, that was a test, please leave the room calmly via the lobby and the main front door, turn right, walk down the ramp towards the cathedral, where you'll find the assembly point. I'm going to begin with some introductions. So my name is Councillor Barry Parsons, and I'm the chair of this committee, and I'm going to ask for the rest of the members of the committee to introduce themselves, starting with Councillor Eddy.
Richard Eddy, City Councillor for Bishopsworth.
Sibu Siso, Councillor for Central Ward.
Rob Logan, Councillor for Fulwood.
Paul Goggin, Councillor for Hartcliffe and Withywood.
Kerry Bells, Councillor for Hartcliffe and Withywood.
Thank you very much, everybody. And we are expecting some more attendees, so hopefully they will arrive at some point during the course of this meeting. So, next up we have apologies for absence. We've received apologies from Councillor Stone, and I've been informed that Councillor Russell will be substituting. Are there any further apologies that we're aware of? No. Okay. For information, following her defection to the Liberal Democrat group, Councillor Peat is no longer sitting on this committee, and Councillor Kerry Bales has joined the committee. So welcome, Kerry. Kerry has sat on this committee previously and always been very pleased to have her contribution, so it's great to have you here. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Councillor Peat for her always lively involvement with this committee over the last couple of years. Great. Next up we have declarations of interest. So this is the point in the meeting where I ask committee members, do you have any interest to declare in relation to any of the items of business on today's agenda? I'm seeing shakes of the head. Great. Agenda item 4 is the minutes of previous meetings. We've got two sets of minutes to be approved this time round from the meetings held on Friday the 13th of February 26 and Friday the 10th of April 26. So first of all, I would like to move the minutes of the meeting held on Friday the 13th as a correct record.
Seconded, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Eddy. Can I ask the committee, are you content to confirm these sets of minutes as... actually, let's do that in a sec. I'm going to move both, if that's all right, and then ask for a confirmation. Great. So I'll also then move the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of April and ask for a seconder.
And if I can second it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Eddy. So now what I'm going to do is ask the committee if you're content to confirm both sets of minutes as a correct record to be signed by me as chair.
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And welcome, Councillor Thomas. No worries. Would you just briefly like to introduce yourself once you've had a chance to get settled? Since we've...
Councillor Jerome Thomas, Clifton Ward.
Thank you. That's great. Okay. Agenda item 5 is Chair's announcements. So just a few items of information to share. The Council is currently recruiting for 2 new directors in the Housing Service. That's a Director of Housing Strategy and Assurance and a Director of Housing Property and Investment. This is part of the continuing work to develop a new Housing Executive Directorate following the appointment of David McNulty as our first permanent Exec Director for Housing. You know, if you're aware of anyone who might be interested, please do share that information with them. I'd also like to draw the committee's attention to this social housing bill, which was recently introduced to Parliament, and that makes some reforms to the right to buy scheme and includes protections for tenants who are victims of domestic abuse. Also like to draw attention to the implementation of the Renters' Rights Act. So most of the reforms contained in that Act took effect on the 1st of May. Most notably amongst that is an end to Section 21 or no-fault evictions, and limits on rent rises, as well as tenants being allowed to ask for pets, and someone I know has already taken advantage of that. We've been involved in a campaign across the southwest called We Rent, with a whole range of partners across the city, civil society organisations and others, making landlords and tenants aware of the new rights that renters have under this Act. And there are more reforms to come later this year, including a new landlord database and an ombudsman, which will come into effect in 2028. That's the end of my announcements. So I'm going to move on to public forum now. Yes.
Sorry, just one item. The last item on your Chairman's opening remarks. I'm aware you've been away this week, or at least on leave, but most members probably have received an open letter from Acorn about the Renters' Rights Bill. It seems to me that they're pushing at very much an open door, because I know your commitment to ensure the enforcement carries on. So presumably you'll reply on behalf of this committee?
I mean, I'm certainly going to reply I'm certainly responding on my own behalf. I wouldn't want to, speak for the rest of the members of the committee, but certainly, I mean, the intent of the letter, which is to make sure that we as a council are making full use of the powers now available to us under that Act is very laudable. It's something that I think we can probably all support. But like I say, I wouldn't want to speak for every member of the committee. Thank you. For public forum, we have up to 30 minutes available. Questions and replies have been circulated to committee members. They've also been published on the website in advance of this meeting. Questioners are permitted up to 2 oral supplementary questions if you wish, which must arise directly out of the original question or reply. Depending on the content of the supplementary questions, we may have to send a follow-up reply in writing to the questioner. We've received 3 questions and 1 statement today, and all of those have come from Dan Ackroyd. So welcome, Dan. It's good to see you here again. As I said, there's a right to ask up to 2 supplementary questions, but since you're the only questioner here, Dan, I think I'm going to allow a bit of flexibility on that if you'd like to take advantage of it. So your 3 questions were on the development of the C365 software suite, on damp and mould data accuracy, and mould process failure. So would you like to ask your supplementary questions now? Start with your first question.
Yeah, first of all, actually, just can I have a bit of clarity on the first answer? I think it might have a typo. So this is question 1, I think. Mm-hmm. It says, however, not all of the required functionality is yet available within NEC, with further enhancements expected in 2026. But can we have any more details of when in 2026?
When in 2026? Who would like to respond to that? Richard? Yeah. So officers, when you speak first, if you're able to introduce yourself and your job title, that would be helpful as well.
Hi. Yes, I'm Richard James, Housing Consumer Standards Programme Lead. There's 2 upgrades to the NEC system that's happening in 2026. Fiona might be able to help on the actual dates.
Sorry. Hi, it's Fiona Lester, Director of Homes and Landlord Services. So we've had the first upgrade, which has taken place. It took place on the 8th of the month. That went well, so that was to 25.1. And the intention is to, later on in the year, around September, October, to move to the second phase of upgrade, which is 26.2. And then we'll be up to date with the NEC programme. NEC generally have 2 upgrades per year to deal with bug fixes.
The methodology coming in the later upgrades, so around September, is the main functionality improvement that is required for us to move landlord compliance activity fully into NEC. That will involve things like automatic scanning of safety certificates into the system and extraction of remedial actions. That's a core bit of functionality that Compliance 365 brings us, and we require to be able to move through to NEC. And also the enhancements on the NEC system that are coming will also help the flow and the management of any follow-on remedial actions through the system, basically, and back into the reporting. So that's the functionality that currently isn't in the system. What we're going to be doing is we've got a number of gateways to move compliance activity into NEC. One of those is to ensure that the functionality within the NEC system, so what's being promised, is actually there. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. And then the second stage is to fully test the system and the functionality alongside the Compliance 365 system to ensure it works in a robust way. If we don't achieve either of those gateways, we will continue with Compliance 365 until we do. The main benefit of moving to the NEC system is that all of the data is held in one system, so you haven't got interface issues between the different systems, which is the main drawback with the current Compliance 365 system. So we've got a plan, but we need to ensure we successfully achieve both of those gateways before we fully commit.
I guess as a supplementary, thanks for that, by the way. So in the Housing and Consumer Standards Programme update document, I think it says that the setup of the C365 system for compliance was only 25% done in February 2026. It seems really odd that we're doing development work that's only going to be in place for about 6 months, it sounds like. I guess, how did that come to pass? Is that just one of those things where choices were made at the start of this project and we're now in a position where we're doing development work that's only going to be used for less than a year?
Richard.
Yeah, the reason we are continuing to move smaller areas of compliance into Compliance 365 is because it helps us to develop the processes. So a lot of these areas are currently managed within sort of spreadsheets and offline systems. What the move into Compliance 365 enables us to do is to develop those processes and improve the format of the data and how it's managed. We don't see that all the work that's being done to move it into Compliance 365 is a waste, because all of that activity to develop those processes and to validate and improve the data is work that we'd need to do to move it into NEC anyway. So there will be some additional work, but it's a step that we would have to take anyway. So that's the reason why we're continuing to focus. The other reason is because we need to achieve those 2 gateways to fully commit to NEC, what we wouldn't want to do is not develop those data and compliance areas further in the interim, because if we didn't achieve those gateways, it won't be moved into NEC within the next 6 months to 9 months. So basically, it's a contingency position as well.
Thank you. Dan, do you have a further supplementary question?
Yeah, thank you. So I've got another supplementary question about the mould case that a member of public raised here recently. The answer says that the committee cannot comment on the specifics of an individual case. That's pretty unfortunate. I mean, I realise you might need to anonymise some information, but the details of where the breakdown was in the process of this person reported mould continuously for a long time and it never got resolved. Where the breakdown was in that process could have been answered. I guess I'll need to get them to ask it again themselves. But for an actual supplementary, it's in the answer, it says, all new damp and mould cases reported since April are now being managed through the NEC system. We are also retrospectively uploading cases raised since 27th of October. What's happening to the cases raised before 27th of October? Are they just being ignored? I mean, that's my understanding. What went wrong in this woman's case is that she'd contacted the council about damp and mould in her property way before October 27. Is this a breakdown in process where we've just not, or should we contact tenants to see if they've still got damp and mould problems?
Thanks, Dan. Who'd like to respond to that? David. And again, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you. So David McNulty, the Executive Director for Housing. So thank you for the question in terms of the supplementary question. The question specifically, the response is in relation to Arab's law compliance, which obviously came in October. So it relates to how we can demonstrate our compliance against the requirement of Arab's law. Prior to that, though, it's not that we've lost reports of damp and mould that have been raised. It's just they don't fall into the requirements that we're now required to process such cases through. So it's not that those repairs are lost. They will be in the kind of wider data cleansing that we're doing for the backlog of cases that's been kind of reported previously through to committee in the last meeting and kind of previous meetings. So they're not lost. We're making sure that they're picked up through the work that's going to address those historic cases and cleanse kind of all repair status and then make sure that we're kind of addressing those cases proactively. And as set out in the response, that additional functionality that we now have in the system will enable us to track these cases much better through so that we're not having the kind of issues that we had with regards to this specific case.
Thank you, David. Dan, have you got a further supplementary question that you'd like to ask him? Okay, thank you very much. Now we move on to public statements then, and the statement that we've received, as I said, is from Dan. So Dan, you can either read out your statement, or since it's been published and shared with the committee, you can also just sort of speak around it if you'd prefer.
So there's some news from the Audit Committee. There's these things called officer decision notices. They are meant to record the reasoning behind decisions. The decision notice to procure the C365 software was never published, which appears to be an unlawful act, and raises questions about how the spending was approved through the finance and legal teams. For the decision to purchase the NEC system, the spreadsheet of the risk log that should have been attached to the decision notice has been lost. For the image-based version that is attached to the agenda item on Modern Gov, some of the words for the risks for the NEC project have been cut off and lost. That's very unfortunate for a project that went from £4 million to £10 million and years overdue. With the failure to record decision notices properly, and with the alleged deletion of both officer and politicians' emails after 30 days, it's going to be harder than it should be to understand the minds of the officers from the start of the project. I think one thing members of this committee haven't grokked yet is that a lot of senior people involved with the IT project have departed. It was wrong for the budget of the project to be increased with an urgent decision in December 2025, when the senior project manager and the executive director were both in their notice period. There should have been detailed explanations of the state of the project and why the £4 million original budget was less than half the final cost. You should probably ask for a list of the people left at the council who have worked on it the most, so you can see how much, if any, first-hand knowledge the council has left of the NEC project in early 2023. Or are we relying solely on hearsay? My understanding is that Barton House Review is coming to this committee next month. I've got a very strong hunch that I know what it's going to say. What should probably happen is that this committee invites a Section 5 report to be written, and then have that Section 5 report with the original review considered by the Homes and Housing Committee, the Audit Committee and the full Council. Instead, I strongly suspect this committee will say that lessons have been learned and that with the new committee system in place, this type of thing won't happen again. So there's no need for any actual action or repercussions. And I really doubt that you're actually going to look at what the Director of Homes and Landlord Services, the guy who was paid over 200 grand a year, was actually doing. A conspiracy of silence does not require coordination. It does not need to be organised. It only requires that enough people, independently, decide that looking away is more comfortable than looking. The elephant need not be hidden, it simply need not be mentioned. It was still really wrong to shut down the Housing Management Board before replacing it. You have the resident voice strategy on the agenda. I don't understand how how tenants are meant to have trust with you when there's still been very, very little root cause analysis or explanation of what actually went wrong in this housing department that led us to have such a huge backlog of problems to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. And of course, there's no response given to public statements as part of the public forum process. But we do, of course, we have a record of all of these statements, and we do consider all the points that are raised in them. So thank you very much for your contributions, Dan. And that concludes public forum. We're going to move on now to item 7, which is the annual business report. This report seeks to confirm the membership of the Homes and Housing Delivery Policy Committee, the proposed meeting dates, and any changes to the terms of reference for the 2026-27 municipal year. It's for information only, and the officer recommendations can be found on page 2 of the supplement, which was published yesterday, the 28th of May, of this report. I'm going to invite Rose Cross, Policy Committee Officer, to briefly outline the report. Rose.
Thank you, Chair. So, as mentioned, this report outlines the membership, including the updated membership of Councillor Bales joining the committee. It outlines Councillor Parsons as the Chair, Councillor Eddy as the Vice Chair, and the terms of reference for the committee. Alongside this, it also has reference to policy committees carrying out policy development and also covers the specific functions of this committee as were approved at full council.
Thank you very much, Rose. This is a fairly straightforward procedural report, but are there any comments or questions that members would like to make on this one? I'm seeing shakes of the head. Okay, I'm going to move on then. So I'm just going to read out the officer recommendations, which, as I said, are on page 2. And those recommendations are to note the membership of the Homes and Housing Delivery Policy Committee for 26-27, to note the appointment of myself, Councillor Barry Parsons, as Chair of the Homes and Housing Delivery Committee for 26-27, and the appointment of Councillor Richard Eddy as the Vice Chair of the Committee for 26-27. Also to note the terms of reference of the committee and the meeting dates for 2026-27. So may I ask the committee to note the report? Thank you. Agenda item 8 is the period 12 finance forecast report. This report presents the Housing and Landlord Services financial forecast at period 12 against the approved budget. It's for information only, and the officer recommendations can be found on page 41 of your papers. I'm now going to invite Martin Johnson, who's our finance business partner for Housing and Landlord Services, to briefly outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. The Period 12 Finance Report reports on the revenue and capital forecast positions of both General Fund and General Fund housing in the HRA. The presentation details the movements between Period 10 as this was the last finance update seen by the committee. General Fund revenue shows a favourable forecast outturn of 0.6 million and capital an underspend of 14.8 million. It should be noted that the General Fund housing outturn position is net of a budget reduction which occurred in Period 12. The budget reduction is a result of the service repaying the 0.4 million loan back to housing delivery, which was used to fund works on the hospital trust properties in previous years. This repayment had previously been reported within the forecast. The HRA revenue forecast position is currently showing a 5.9 million surplus. I'll spend a bit of time on that later explaining this large movement. And capital underspend of 20 million against a revised budget of 145.8. The reasons for the forecast over and underspends are detailed in the report, the main points of which I will cover in my commentary. But it is also worth pointing out that a number of estimates have been used to arrive at the Period 12 position, whilst we continue to reconcile the financial reporting within the new housing management system. So, General Fund revenue. Private housing and accessible homes has seen an adverse movement of 0.1 million, higher than Period 10, as we continue to review and refine salaries capitalisation process. The main movements within a housing delivery service, which is seeing a reduction to forecast spend of 0.7 million. This is due to salaries underspends of 0.4 million, which had previously been identified by the service, but was not forecast as the savings were in consideration for funding the de-risking of the site associated with the Oasis Academy Trust. Alternative funding has now been identified for this, and so the revenue savings have been realised within the service. As well as these salary savings, the service were also successful in accessing funding through the Council House Building Support Fund of 0.2 million. Can we go to the next slide, please? General Fund capital, as previously mentioned, showing an underspend of 14.8 million. This is a further reduction of 7 million over Period 10 and is largely driven by further slippage in the housing delivery programme, which has been reported on throughout the year. In addition, private housing are forecasting an increase in slippage of 0.5 million into next year in relation to adaptation works. These sums have been committed to be spent, but were not spent before 31st of March. And a similar amount relating to the local authority's housing fund, whereby the contribution to the residents' property fund will now not take place until the summer. The Tackling Homelessness Transformation Programme has also seen a further increase in slippage due to property acquisitions not being completed by the 31st of March. The remaining properties were under offer or close to completion at the end of the year, and this slippage is expected to be spent during the first quarter of the new financial year. As always, any slippage or overspends have been reprofiled across the remaining life of these budgets, so there was no overall impact on total budget allocation. Next slide, please. So, HRA is forecasting a surplus of 5.9 million. However, this is down to year-end technical adjustments around financing of the capital programme and reserves movements which had not been finalised. The reconciliation on the right hand of this slide shows that the actual position of 0.6 million, which is in line with the Period 10 position. However, there have been some key movements within the HRA. Service charge income is 1 million lower than P10, but this is offset by £1 million lower costs for service chargeable items within special services. There were a number of small variations totaling 0.3 million within the repairs service and also within supervision and management relating to various small salaries underspends. These were offset by lower council tax costs and voids and lower debt write-offs. Although net interest payable has seen no movement, both interest receivable and interest payable are higher than forecast at P10. This has had an impact on the interest cover ratio that I will cover later. Next slide, please. Sorry, I think we've covered that one as well. If we go to the next slide. On HRA capital, Home improvements has shown a further underspend of 4.5 million over period 10. The report gives the detail by individual scheme, but the overriding reasons remain slippages within individual projects. Most of these slippages are resource capacity related, particularly with the roof replacement project, along with the change to the scope of works of smoke alarm replacements and delays caused by contract signing for the rolling retrofit programme. These slippages and underspends have been offset by some overspends in major block repairs and major refurbishment at Bishoport 5 and Wallen Gardens, due to changes of scope as a result of the condition of some of our buildings. HRA 2, new building land enabling, is showing a reduced slippage position of 8.3 million, which is an increase in spend of 1.6 million over period 10. As with HRA 1, the reasons for this are detailed in the main report, with the key movements being an increase in slippage on the Leinster Avenue site, offset by a reduction to slippage at the Cameron Centre. Overall, slippages has been offset by the acceleration of spend on the Branwhite and Greville projects. HRA infrastructure, which is HRA 4, is seeing a lower than forecast outturn by 0.3 million, as capitalised salaries are lower than previously estimated. On capital receipts, page 12 of the report provides details of capital receipts during 25-26. However, this section of the report, I do have to point out, does contain an error, and the receipts generated during the year are higher than detailed within the report. Actual receipts for the year totaled 19.2 million, with 17.1 million being through right to buy and 2.1 million from shared ownership sales. There were also a small number of low-value disposals of land. So on covenant compliance, if you go to the next slide, please. So whilst there's been overall a minimal change in the outturn position, the interest cover ratio has seen a larger deterioration than would have been expected from the movement. This is due to a difference between how the business plan calculates the interest payable charge, which is the figure we use to set the budget, and how the Treasury team applies the interest charge. As the HRA had not previously borrowed any sums in year, this issue had previously gone unnoticed. I've remodelled the business plan, next year's business plan, with the revised interest charge assumptions within it. And whilst there is a deterioration to the position, as you would expect, the plan does remain compliant. In summary, general fund housing revenue outturn is an improved position over the P10 forecast, primarily as a result of salary savings previously set aside for an alternative purpose and the receipt of additional revenue grants, where capital delivery has continued to see further slippages across projects. HRA revenue, once adjusted for year-end technical adjustments, has outturned in a position broadly the same as P10, albeit with offsetting movements within the account, as with general fund capital delivery has seen further slippages. Whilst the HRA remains compliant against its interest cover ratio, this has deteriorated due to the final mix of interest payable and receivable. It is also worth reiterating that the outturn has been arrived at through the use of estimates, both general fund and HRA, in respect of some income-related items such as rents and service charges, voids and bad debt, as we continue to work towards reconciling the finance reporting elements of the new housing management system. I'll now take any questions.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I think I'd just like to reflect, first of all, on the fact that really the overall picture that we're seeing here, I think, is of a remarkably steady ship. I can't help but sort of compare that to the experience that we had when we first came into administration and inherited a budget that was, that was pretty wild and contained some very wide variances. This really bears witness, I think, to the hard work of Martin and everyone in his team, and indeed everyone in the housing service, in really sort of bringing stability and accuracy of forecasting into the sort of heart of how we're managing our budget. And that stability really sets the scene, I think, for the investment priorities that we're going to be laying out in our asset management strategy, which will be coming to this committee later in this year. and gives us the opportunity to sort of think about the future really of our homes across the city, including things like estate regeneration. So this is, I think this is a really good position for us to be in at the end of the year, and I want to thank officers for that. I'm going to open up to questions and comments. I'm going to start with Councillor Gooch, and since you didn't manage to arrive in time for the round of introductions at the beginning, could you introduce yourself before?
Yes, I was planning to do that. I'm Caroline Gooch, councillor for Westbury and Henleaze for the Liberal Democrats. This might not be exactly the right time to ask this question. It's just that I made this note while I was going through these papers because you mentioned the right to buy receipts. So I was just wondering, you may want to just put it instead as a separate agenda item in a future committee. But I was just wondering whether we are now replacing houses lost due to right to buy, because obviously we've probably had a large glut of people coming in wanting to buy before the discounts changed. So I was just wondering whether or not we're actually achieving replacement.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. Yeah, I think it would be good to see if we can at least attempt an answer at that question now, and then we can look into it further if needs be. Martin.
Certainly, we have delivered, I believe, a record number of properties within the city, not just Bristol City Council itself, but we've been instrumental in enabling the delivery of a record number of affordable homes within the city this year. The business plan does have provision, as we know, for replacement of units in the future. And you are correct, we have seen a glut of applications arriving immediately after the changes to the right to buy criteria were announced. What we expect to see, though, and what we've modelled in the plan, and what the sector is modelling into their business plans, is a significant reduction in future right-to-buy applications, because it's just not as attractive, it's not as affordable, fewer people will qualify. So if you take those three things into consideration, it does look quite horrendous that we've disposed of so many this year, and we expect to dispose of a reasonable number in future years. But our forward-looking assumptions have reduced from approximately 100 units per year in right-to-buy disposals down to 15. And that's something that Savills have advised us on. So yes, there is a need to replace these units. There are plans within the business plan to do so. And the housing delivery team is working at pace to deliver as many as they can.
At our work programme setting workshop earlier this year, we approved setting up a task and finish group to develop our new affordable housing delivery plan. And I think this is a question that members will want to delve into as part of that working group. I'm going to go to Councillor Eddy next.
I actually asked Martin one minor remaining question on his report before the meeting, so he can be assured that's been done. I just wanted, at the risk of me truism, to underscore what you said, Chairman. I mean, within a week or so of us being appointed, you as Chairman, me as Vice Chairman, it was obvious we've been briefed by officers about the Savile report, the recommended self-referral to the social housing regulator, and everything which has flowed from that directly in terms of actually looking at our housing stock and the way we deal with our tenants and the way they can help us to deal with them, which I'll address later in this agenda flows from that. But Keeley has been really robust financial control. The fact we have been, and this committee has been able to rely on the team headed by Martin, so effectively is important and it's crucial. I want to pay tribute to that, of course. As members may know, I want to quote yes, Minister, as a very formulative process in my bringing of my approach to dealing with public service officers and civil servants, but also I do actually start from a position. When I am in a position like this, I like officers who bring me solutions, not just questions, and this is something we've had from the entire team.
Thank you. Yeah, very much agree with that. Councillor Thomas.
I welcome the kind of the steady ship finances that you comment on, Chair, and that's very positive. I think the presentation is kind of reasonably well structured. I mean, as you know, it's a real bugbear of mine that the presentation isn't close enough in the kind of numbers it shows with what's presented in the report. So it's confusing and difficult to understand in parts. And this is a comment that I've made repeatedly. Taking as an example, I'm just kind of checking this interest rate cover. There's nothing in the report that can be linked to what's said here. The closest that I can find, and I might just not be looking through carefully enough, is what it states on page 41. Is that where I should be linking what's in the papers, Martin, with what's on the presentation here?
Yes, so I take on board what you say. I've tried to make the links a bit clearer by referencing the report page numbers, but what I have just come to realise is that you're referring to page 41 of the report, whereas when I draft the report, it's page 7 or 8, because obviously you get the report in the full bundle.
Yeah.
So that referencing isn't going to work. But if there are instances like that where, yes, we do report on the interest cover ratio, it maybe isn't as clear in the report what the movement period on period is, or could be clearer.
I think it's more fundamental than that. You know, what I think the committee needs to be able to see in order to actually really be able to understand these figures is pretty much a like-for-like comparison between what's sitting in the report and what's sitting on the screen. So if I look at interest cover ratio on page 41 in the report, it's talking about 125%, 136%, 126%, minus 10. This is meaningless for us. You know, unless we can see the same stuff repeated, you know, one meeting after another, we will never get to understand what this stuff means. And where this 1.31% to 1.26%, where does that show up in the report? I can't see it anywhere. How am I supposed to understand that?
Thank you.
Well, they don't even compare, Caroline. Yeah. Yeah. They're completely different numbers, impossible to understand. So we really need to see some improvements in the consistency between what's presented in the papers and what we see on a PowerPoint presentation. So that's very much about process. If I come on to the content, the bit that I wanted to look at, and I just need to go to a different page. So the housing revenue account on page 37. If we're looking at the position of we're basically looking at a surplus, which you know of 5.9 million, but that is with 18 million transferred from reserves. So the original position at the start of the year was that we were going to have 7.6 million drawn down from reserves. Is that right?
So there are essentially two lanes for drawing down from reserves. One is the revenue contribution from capital outlay, which was approximately 12.5 million, I think, in the budget. And the other is to cover the overall deficit position of the HRA, which is the 7.6 million that you refer to.
So that was the original budget, that the 7.6 million would be coming
Yes.
from reserves, but we've actually got 18 million coming out of reserves. So
Yes,
I think that what we need to understand, so to my simple mind, if we're taking 18 million pounds from reserves, we haven't got a surplus of any kind. We're drawing down on our balance sheet. So I don't need to understand that in full now, but certainly we need, within the main body of the report, an analysis of what the reserves position is, so that we can see how much financial headroom we're operating in the various different places.
So that 18 million was an estimate based on period 10 outturn to try and progress us through the year-end accounts process. It's not the final technical year-end adjustment.
What it says in the accounts is that is the outturn from P12. So, I mean, I realise there's something in the notes that might say something different, but we need to be able to look at these numbers. If it's called outturn, it should be outturn and not something that's going to be fiddled around with.
So it's, at period 12, it's provisional outturn because we know we haven't finished all technical adjustments at that point. The technical adjustments with regards to reserves and financing of the capital programme have now been completed. So I'm happy to pull together a reconciliation that takes you from that £5.9 million surplus, shows the movements in reserves, and gives you the reserves figure at the end of the year.
That's great, and we need an overall simple presentation of the reserves position and an understanding of how much financial headroom we've got based on our reserve position. Have we got 70 million in reserves, or have we got 15 million in reserves? How close are we? How much headroom have we got in terms of if things don't go to plan and we need to draw down on those reserves next year?
All right.
Answer it now,
Yeah,
but
thank you very much.
I can't answer it now. In total, we've got about 68 million in reserves, of which 35 million is the HRA general reserve, which is 6 million more than was anticipated when the budget was set.
Okay.
But
we need to be able
pull
to.
something.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, as ever, I think I'd like to thank Councillor Thomas for his forensic approach to our finances and to the way that we report that. I think that's really added to the transparency and the clarity within how we demonstrate to our residents and to the city that we're doing our best to provide best value for our people's taxes and rents. So I think we're going to take that feedback and use that to hopefully further improve the way that we report this information in the future. Just like to remind members, of course, if you have supplementary questions to your initial question, please do go through the chair. It makes it much easier for the meeting to be managed. So thank you. And I'm going to go to Councillor Logan next.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Martin. At risk of me-forism, the report is really clear, and you've really done a great job. A complex task of presenting very complicated information consistently over the last year. So I want to say thank you for that, partly because I think I've said that at the last two meetings when you haven't been here. So I'm quite pleased by that. My main worry is there's been quite a lot of movement between period 10 and period 12, more than I would have expected, given the confidence we've had so far. So on the general fund capital, so it's not unusual to have slippage. That's not dramatically unsurprising. It is slightly surprising not to have forecast it. So the last committee, the largest item was the Philwood Community Centre, which we know a lot about. That wasn't a surprise. That's not the biggest item now. The biggest item now is relating to the Hengrove developments. So at the last committee, we weren't expecting a significant slippage, and now we've got 3 million slippage. And that's not about financial reporting. That's about people telling you what's happening rather than you doing the analysis correctly. So I'm slightly surprised that has happened within that time. So I'd quite, if possible, unless anyone is here today that knows the answer to that, I think the committee should be given an update in terms of in terms of why that's happened. I think possibly we may be having the development programme at the next committee. If so, it'd be quite good to know kind of what's happened in relation to that.
Yeah.
In terms of the directly financial issues, Martin, so I was surprised by the difference in the interest cover ratio. Given the scale of, given the relatively limited movement, you wouldn't have expected an analysis of that change. You've done a reasonable job of explaining the differences in an analysis. Now, I'm not sure how much detail we need today, but I wonder if maybe that could be circulated to the committee, because we can't have different parts of the council having a different interpretation of how they cope with interest. And what we need to have confidence in is the integrity of the business plan. And you're saying that it's still going to be at least 125% over the period of the business plan, but it seems quite tight to it, and we can't have a surprise. So I'd quite like some more information, either now or subsequently, over why that's happened. Yeah. My last question is, there's quite a lot of accounting type changes, and that's inevitable at the end of the year, but there's a few things that aren't accounting transactions, but are things that maybe haven't been evident before. So there are two things of point 4 that are a bit surprising. So the issue of the money reserved for the Oasis School issue versus a salary underspend is not really, they are not similar. So I don't think they should have been treated in that way in the first place. But also I think you said that there was a positive, that there was a repay of a loan to the housing delivery programme, possibly not this year. So is that something that has been uncovered that wasn't clear over previous months? Because I wouldn't have expected that to have been a period 12 adjustment. I would have expected us to have known that before.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Councillor.
So,
Martin.
Thank you, Chair. So on the salaries issue within housing delivery, we had previously identified, as I say, that there were going to be they weren't going to spend all of their budget. But there was a prior political commitment to giving some money to the Oasis Academy Trust to help them de-risk their development site. And we had assumed at that point that the use of those salary savings would be used to fund that de-risking. But when we progressed discussions more towards the end of the year with Section 151, with Andy Rothery, he had another viewpoint on how we should fund that. And that decision was taken in CIB after period 10 reporting. So we were no longer using those salary savings to fund the work at Oasis Academy Trust, which meant those savings crystallised during the year. I'm not that close to the decision, so I don't actually know what the alternative funding source is. On the repayment of the loan, it was within forecasts that the loan would be repaid, and it was forecast as a payment from one area to another. How it was how it was actually dealt with, was varying the budget from one area to the other. So we were aware of it, and we were effectively reporting on that 0.4 million loan, but the actual financial treatment of it was different to how we'd initially thought. And I'm sorry, was there another point as well, Councillor Logan?
So I would like more detail on why the definitions and the interest cover ratio have
on the interest
changed.
cover ratio.
Now,
yeah.
I'm slightly nervous about testing committee members' patience about how much detail we want today. But I want more confidence that we're all on the same page in that, and that what impact it has on the integrity of the business plan. It's not really the number for this year that is the biggest deal. It's about what impact that has in terms of future analysis. I don't know if you're able to comment on that now, but if not, we will need more detail on that subject.
I mean, I could cover it now, but I could cover it in more detail if I was to give a written response to that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do that. I mean, I think you've got plenty of colleagues who have plenty of patience for discussions about interest cover ratios. Rob, you're not alone. But yeah, let's get a written report on that, shall we? Councillor Shabalala.
Thanks, Chair. Martin, thank you very much for bringing this report. One thing that I find quite exciting and I would like a little bit of context on is the income generation in terms of welfare rights and monitoring advice team. In terms of the support that's been given to residents, is that what, 456 residents? And during this whole cost of living, you've actually been able to save people or reclaim from benefits and also get lump sum from DWP of close to £4 million. Does anyone in the team know more about that? Welfare rights and monetary advice team is doing some excellent work.
Hi, Mark, head of Estates and Tenancy Management. That team is part of our Housing Options Department, Paul Sylvester's team. I believe every year they pull together an end-of-year report on the work that they've done, so I can ask him to share that with you. And that has the granular detail you're after with regards to the number of people they've worked with, the amount they've saved, etc.
Thanks, Mark. It's a fantastic achievement, and I think it's something we need to shout more about, having have saved people in our housing. £4 million is something that we shouldn't be quiet about. So thanks for bringing it, but I think we do need a bit more context on it, Chair, if you agree. My other one is around energy savings, 2 million. I'm just interested in where we're getting the energy savings and our residents getting those energy savings equally in terms of the district heating costs.
Thank you, Sibs. And does someone have an answer for that?
We do work with the Centre for Sustainable Energy, so we've been doing a lot of work with them, referring residents who are in fuel poverty. We are going to be setting up a programme to support the regulations for heat networks. Okay. So we're going to need to do some work around that, and part of that piece of work will be around further support for vulnerable residents who are in fuel poverty. And that we can bring back with a further update on what that will look like with regards to the support that we'll be offering. I think that will form part of the transformation work that will be happening in our service.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Goggin next.
One more, Chair, just to finish off.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, the last one there is probably also for yourself, Mark. The delays to the retrofit is a huge slippage. I'm just concerned about how we are communicating that delay to residents.
Yeah, I'll need to speak to colleagues in cyclical maintenance about that, because they're managing the remedial works.
All right, we'll get a written response on that then. Councillor Goggin next.
Thank you, Chair. And just an observation, really, I suppose. I'd like to say about Ramas that, gosh, 16, 17 years ago, I had the wonderful Bal Shargil and her team help me. I certainly wouldn't be here as a councillor if it wasn't for them, and I may not even have been here full stop. I had Bristow and Souter banging on my door trying to evict me, whilst Bal was actually in my living room telling me to tell them to transfer the debt back. And then I had the bailiff lying to me saying, oh, no, we can't do that. So there you go. It was a bit strange having two agencies, I suppose, trying to do diametrically opposite things to myself. But I can't say enough how fantastic Ramas is, and I'm sure the value for money in terms of tenant protection, if you like, is second to none.
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree with that, Paul. And I think, you know, especially with the ongoing cost of living crisis, it's even more important to our residents. And I think it's the way that Ramas works to sort of help make sure that people are getting the benefits that they're entitled to, that to sort of help people to develop their sort of financial resilience, is a really important model, I think, probably for the whole of the city, really, and sort of thinking about how we can help to sort of build the resilience of our communities, and help to prevent people getting into crisis. So yeah, I think it's a fantastic service, and I do love it when members spontaneously bring it up. It's great to hear about. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you. So I didn't pick up on one of the capital expenditure questions I had. So on page 37, we had anticipated capital expenditure funded from HRA in our budget of 13.8 million. We then seem to have had lower capital expenditure during the course of the year than we were anticipating, but we then funded 18.5 million of capital expenditure from HRA. So I'm just wondering, I mean, was that very much a discretionary choice that somebody said, do you know what, we're going to fund that CapEx from the HRA? So that's the first part of that question. The second is, I would expect CapEx to be a kind of, you know, a balance sheet item rather than us now seeming to expense it in the revenue account. So perhaps you could explain those two things, please.
So the level of revenue capital funding is discretionary. As I've previously said, it's not going to be 18 million. That was at a point in time where we didn't have the full picture for the end of year position. We were trying to use forecast figures on the capital programme, forecast figures on grants that we were expected to receive, right to buy receipts, etc., etc. Now that we have all of that, the actual figure for finance and capital programme is around about 7 million, which represents the lower level of the capital spend. On the second point, it's a funny sort of local authority quirk to fund capital expenditure out of revenue. It doesn't happen in the RP world, and it doesn't just happen within housing. It happens happens across the local authority.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Thank you, Martin. So we've had a really good in-depth discussion of our end-of-year finance figures, which I think is only appropriate. I'm going to move us on now, though, because we've got plenty of other items to get through. And I'm going to read out the officer recommendation, which is that the Homes and Housing Delivery Committee notes the report on the P12 forecast and the associated appendices for housing and landlord services. So please, can you note the report? Thank you. Agenda item 9 is the Q4 Corporate Risk Report. This report provides an update on current significant strategic risks relevant to the Homes and Housing Delivery Committee to achieving the Council's objectives as set out in the corporate strategy for 2025-2030. It summarises progress in managing the risks and actions being taken at Q4 2025-6. It's for information only, and the recommendations can be found on page 47. I'm going to invite David McNulty, who is Exec Director of Housing, to briefly outline the report.
Thank you, Councillor Parsons. So, this report sets out the Q4 position in terms of key corporate risks within the Homes and Housing Delivery Committee's purview, and the actions that we're taking to manage those risks. It highlights essentially significant and persistent risks. So it's not all the risks across the Housing Directorate that we manage, but it's the key kind of critical ones. And some of those risks are a reflection of the kind of wider environment within which we're operating, but then also some of them specifically relate to historical and current kind of management of services. So the ones that are largely kind of driven by kind of external factors, which obviously we're seeking to reduce down and mitigate the impact of those risks, is around the challenging delivery of sufficient affordable housing, the continued pressures with regards to kind of homelessness and cost of temporary accommodation, and then of course the kind of wider building safety and regulatory landscape, which again, as a significant landlord, we are responding to. So those are, as I say, largely kind of driven by demand, market conditions and national policy, and remain high. I think as set out in the report, though, these are well understood and broadly stable. So we are actively managing these through our core programmes that have been reported more widely through to committee, and then also a number of kind of different delivery plans. Alongside this, the report also highlights risks relating to our statutory landlord and safety obligations. So again, this is, say, different in nature, and so the risk really reflects the historic kind of weakness that's been reported through to committee in terms of our compliance and assurance around our statutory obligations, which is obviously subject to kind of further reports on this agenda this morning. And so, as is set out in the report, there's been a lot of ongoing action which is focused on improving the position, strengthening our approach and oversight to ensure that we are meeting those standards. So I would, welcome questions from the committee to both myself and housing colleagues that are available this morning to respond. So thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I mean, I think you talked about persistent risks, and I think the word persistent is probably quite a pertinent one in relation to this report. We do have a number of rather static risks in this area, don't we? And I think it really sort of speaks to the fact that that this is such a it's such a large service, and the pace of change can feel, to be honest, frustratingly slow at times. But we are, as David's outlined, we're actively putting a very large number of mitigations in place against every single one of these risks. So conscious of the fact that the committee has seen versions of this report that look fairly similar several times recently, I'm going to open up for questions and comments. Councillor Logan.
The de-risking of the homelessness risk, or the removal of that from the corporate risk register to being managed at a departmental level, what is the real impact of that?
David, would you like to respond?
In some ways, very little, because obviously there's quite a wide programme of transformation to respond to those pressures, which is still in flight. So there's a lot of work that's happened and continues to happen with regards to the supply of affordable accommodation to meet temporary housing kind of pressures that we face. And then there's also further activity which is planned in relation to increasing and improving our performance with regards to homelessness preventions. So in some ways, it changes very little in effect in terms of our management of what is still a risk. It's just that positive work that's happened means that it's come down from that kind of corporate level, but we're still managing kind of what is a significant risk, and also given that that's largely driven by kind of, as I said earlier, demand pressures, there's obviously a concern, given the current climate and what's happening in terms of cost of living, that's something that we need to keep under active review.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you very much, David. I'm usually a great fan of kind of conciseness, and we've only got 3 risks here. And that presumably is because it's been cascaded down from corporate, as you say. I think from the overall risk point of view, will we have a kind of more horizon scanning, longer list of risks? Because that then helps us to see the ones that might escalate up to the corporate level. And we've seen them before, haven't we? I mean, maybe they're there.
David, would you like to respond on that?
Yeah. I mean, there is a much wider group of risks that are being managed. It would be nice if there were only 4, but there isn't, and more than happy to kind of bring a wider report in terms of risks across the Housing Directorate to a future meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'm not seeing any further hands. Sibs, Councillor.
Thanks. I think it's item 10, the Senior Leadership Structural Charter. I think that's a great idea, breaking them up into 3 reports. I think that would be very useful. Do you know when that type of reporting will come through?
Thank you. Yeah, we can certainly bring that as part of that kind of wider report that I've just referenced, because we will be able to break down, obviously, risks across the kind of different divisions that now comprise the Housing Directorate as a whole. So, yeah, we can bring it as part of that report.
Brilliant. My question was more in terms of the work stream for tackling homelessness. Yeah, which specific work stream is not performing well in tackling homelessness program?
So the strand that hasn't delivered in line with what was anticipated is with regards to the preventions work. So that's the area of focus now of this next quarter, is to make sure that we're kind of revising the plan in relation to improving our kind of preventions work. And then the other thing that's obviously influencing that is the kind of wider government announcements with regards to kind of our homelessness strategy and kind of reviewing provisions that are in place. So it's there's an opportunity to bring the two things together to have a kind of really clear focus and emphasis on that, and also in terms of the aspirations that are set out in terms of the Council's wider corporate plan. Although it's obviously frustrating for ourselves and colleagues in the programme that strand hasn't delivered, I think it's worth though bearing in mind in the overall transformation programme, the other work streams have over-delivered. So in terms of the overall programme as a whole, it's actually significantly ahead of what was originally anticipated. So that's not to temper our kind of ambition with regards to the prevention work strand at all, but it's just to put it in context that we want to improve that, but overall actually the transformation program's been quite a success and is behind the dropping of the kind of risk from the corporate view to being just held now at the directorate level.
Thank you. And it's probably worth saying as well that that prevention, which is very much embedded in our corporate strategy, is really emerging as I think a key theme of this year for this council, and it's something that we're looking at across the whole council, not just in the area of housing and landlord services, but really there are so many so many interactions and so many opportunities actually for us to get out into our communities and help support people to, as I talked about earlier, to avoid reaching crisis point and really to sort of do that prevention work with people and alongside them.
Yes, thanks, Charles. Just going to wrap up for David. When we have the different reports from the 3 different services, I'd like the risk register to be independent also. So at least you have 3 or at least 8 risks per team, and then we have the overall arching risk register that picks whatever the top 3 or 4 from each of those committees to present. Because I think when you look at each portfolio and it's only just a few that's highlighted, you don't see what could come. What I'd prefer is that we actually list that, it's a longer list, and I think 8 would be a good kind of number. And then we can select, the top 4 out of each of those departments and make that into the core risk document.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ed. Do you want to respond to that? I mean, I guess probably the sensible thing to do with that would be to sort of take that away to the risk team and take that feedback and because we have a corporate approach to risk across the whole council. It's not just our committee that would be affected by changes to how we report on risks.
Well, we certainly reflect on that as a comment.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move us on if that's all right. So I'm going to read the recommendation, which is simply that the Homes and Housing Delivery Committee notes this report. Thank you. Next up is our Housing Consumer Standards Programme and Compliance Update. This report presents the latest Housing Consumer Standards Programme update, the External Consumer Standards Review, the External Strategic Root Cause and Lessons Learned Review, the March 2026 Landlord Compliance Performance Report, the Resident Voice Update, and the feedback from the last meeting with the Regulator of Social Housing. The report is for information only, and the officer recommendations can be found on page 55. I'm going to invite Richard James, Housing Consumer Standards Programme Lead, to briefly outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm mindful there's an awful lot in this report and appendices, so I'll give a brief summary and then hand over for questions. So, yes, Section 1 includes the general programme update. So, for February, March, it shows that we're currently in red status for the programme, and there's four main reasons for that. One is the partial completion of milestone 2 that we discussed at the last committee meeting. The second is ongoing work with some post-go-live, NEC go-live phase 1 issues. The third is around landlord compliance challenges and the improvement with our landlord compliance activity. And the fourth is around the status of milestone 3 and milestone 4, which is there's some charts which are in Appendix 1. Give more detail on that. Just to pull out that we are in the process of refreshing the improvement plan at the moment, which will take into consideration the consumer standards review, which is in this pack, the root cause assessment, which is also in this pack, and also taking into account learning from the partial completion of milestone 2. Some timelines on that refresh is all outlined in Section 1. Very high level summary of the consumer standards review. So it's a balanced report, I feel, which shows good progress made in a number of areas, but also identifies some further work and further priorities that we need to focus on, namely further work on data and systems. Also, it brings out the need for the resident voice strategy, which is later on the agenda today, and picks out a focus that we need to make on complaints, ASB, hate crime, customer satisfaction and communication, including our digital offer. And then it also picks out longer term priorities to continue to work on, which is around how our management of performance and reporting, and being able to demonstrate how the council improves social and environmental economic outcomes for residents. But overall, I think what that report does show is there has been progress, but clearly there's more work to do. There's similar themes, I think, coming out of the strategic root cause and lessons learned update. This is a refresh of a root cause review that was carried out and presented to the committee in February 25. What it shows is that progress has been made. There's the review RAG rates key root cause areas and that we need to focus on. And what it demonstrates is there's a small number of actions that we have responded to the root cause. Most are in the amber status, which means we've done some work, made some progress, but we've got more to do, which I think is fair and reflects the consumer standards review, and probably also reflects where we are with the programme. So we're about halfway through the housing consumer standards improvement strategy time period. So there has been progress. There's clearly more work to do with some of the fundamental areas. Just pulling out the key areas that we need to focus on, and that's around focusing on culture, change, accountability, and a resident focus for all colleagues. Implementing the full senior leadership structure. So we've discussed today, I think progress is being made on that. There's clearly some more work to do. and also further work with data governance and implementation of the NEC system. Again, there's been discussions around that already today. And there's also actions around how we work with our corporate support functions to deliver the services we need to our residents. So it doesn't all sit with the housing service. Okay. So moving on to the landlord compliance, I won't go into an enormous amount of detail. What it does show is there is a lot of incremental progress. We're not where we want to be, but you can see that there is progress that is happening and moving through. The one area that is still a challenge for us is around gas servicing, and I think we know since the system was moved out, we're not managing it through NEC. There's challenges with offline systems, but we are making progress with improving the number of overdue gas services, and also we're hoping that we'll have the system being managed completely through the NEC system during June, which will be a big step forward and really help our assurance and governance in that area. Residents' voice. So we met with both the Housing Scrutiny Panel and also the Resident and Community Panel to talk around progress with the programme. The report outlines the comments from both panels, and really it reflects that they can see progress being made sort of around foundations, but there's still a strong voice really that we need to really focus and improve the service for residents. Our day-to-day services clearly need more work and more improvement, and around communication, and that sort of links into the residents' voice strategy, and how we interact with residents and are more visible and accessible within the estates. Sort of the three themes that we need to focus on. On the update with the regulatory housing, probably not a great deal to say. We're meeting with them monthly. We have a constructive relationship with them. What they are really interested in is what we're going to do to respond to the reviews that are in this report, how we're pulling out those themes, and what impact is that going to have on the strategy. And we're going to come back to you in the July committee to articulate that. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I think one thing that's very clear, I think, is we've been through a period of some quite considerable turbulence, I think, with some of the some of the issues that Richard has raised, but we are still continuing to see incremental progress in improving really the level of service that we provide to our residents, which is what we have to be focused on, I think, as a council and as a landlord. It's about making sure that our residents are safe and well in their homes and are receiving the standard of service that they should expect. And I did actually want to mention one sort of bright point, which is in that external report that Richard mentioned, RAG rating various aspects of our progress. One of the real bright spots actually is around our reporting, around our governance, around our scrutiny, and the involvement of this committee. And I think largely because of the work that we do here in this committee, we're probably the most transparent social landlord in the entire country. We really do share absolutely everything, warts and all, with this committee and with the wider public, and I think that's really important to as we work to try and rebuild trust with our residents. So I'm going to go to questions and comments now. I'm going to start with Councillor Gogging.
Thanks, Barry. And I didn't realise the SRA was enough to buy a solid gold water bottle. I don't know if that's a Trump thing or what. Sorry.
It's green, actually, if you look at it in certain...
Fair play, fair play. I digress. Sorry. Yeah, I'm just asking about milestone 2. It was reassessed May/June, and I think we're about as in the middle of that period as you can get. So just wondering when that's going to happen and when that's going to come to the committee.
Yes, so we're just in the process of finalising that. We've got the Housing Consumer Standards Programme Board next Thursday, and we'll be presenting where we are with milestone 2 there. I think what it's going to show is that a lot of the issues with milestone 2 were around being able to evidence completion of activities, and there's certainly improvement in that area. There will be other further work to do, but so again on this theme of incremental improvements, we are going to make improvements, but I think it's unlikely we'll say we've completed absolutely everything of milestone 2. But as I said, that'll come back to the July committee alongside the refresh of the programme.
Thank you. Councillor Eddy.
At the commencement of this report, Richard Haff apologised for the plethora of facts. To be frank, every report he presents on the customer standards programme contains loads of facts, because loads of things are being done. And yes, some are not as quick as we would like, but others we've achieved, that's good. And I'm particularly pleased that appalling indictment of this authority about that when stock surveyors ceased during COVID, but they never recommenced afterwards. Now we're up to over 70%. I believe by the end of next March, we should have hit 100% within the 5 years, so that's a credit. I'd just like to focus on the Savile strategic root cause, partly because when Barry was recovering from his op back in December 2024, I remember going to that first debrief with Savile's officers, and it wouldn't be unfair to say I was probably more shocked in that 90 minutes than I've been in my political service on this council. And I think not clearly we knew officers were putting in place with political support the necessary work much before then to correct that. Well, and I'm pleased to see that 12 months and a bit on, Savile's comment approvingly, we make significant progress. And as Richard highlighted, the main area perhaps where we haven't is culture. And I do appreciate when there is so much technically and investment-wise to do, it's naturally we are actually focusing on that. And we have done handing off with that, re-established the residents panel, and at this meeting, hopefully we will endorse the residents' voice strategy. So that's good. And, you know, I don't think we can do 1,000 things all at the same time, but hopefully after this has had a time to bed in this new strategy, the residents panel, hopefully we can actually seriously address culture, because frankly it's something throughout my political career, particularly until 9 years ago, representing one of the largest council estates in this city. I do think we need to address that, and that comes back to us every housing ombudsman report we receive. There's some element usually of culture which comes into that, so we mustn't forget that. And I would hope at an appropriate time, now we've got the new strategy and the panel in place, we can begin to address that.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, I think that's such an important heart of what we need to do. I think it's, you know, it's just so important that that really everyone who works in our service sees our residents as you know, as people. You know, takes ownership of whatever needs to be done in order to you know, to sort of solve their issues, and really sort of you know, communicates with the people that we're working on behalf of. You know, we can have the best structure in the world, but if we don't have the right culture to go with it, then we're not going to deliver what we need to do. Councillor Gooch.
Yes, I was also going to mention the culture, but more in the... I didn't see this report before because I wasn't on the committee, I think, when it originally came out. Yeah, I was quite shocked as well by what was in it. But just sort of going through that, it just seemed to me, I think I wondered whether you've done I mean, I know we do generally staff surveys and things, but I'm just wondering, particularly within the housing department, whether staff feel, I think I made some notes, whether they feel empowered, whether they've got the skills, and whether they feel like there's a career progression for them, or whether they feel they're just treading water. Because if you feel that your job's a bit of a dead end and you're just sort of treading water, you might not, you know, go the extra mile. But if you feel like you've got a career with progression and opportunities and it's exciting, then you're going to do all those things, like, you know, working with people in different areas and the reaching out and you know, having that sort of global vision of what's going on. I think it's I'm the sort of person that sort of, you know, normally reaches out across boundaries and stuff to make sure everything's working together. But you only do that if you feel like you've got a stake in the system. So I'm just sort of wondering whether we've got an idea of how people feel in how the, you know, council employees feel about that, and whether they feel there is you know, progress track for them to move up, because it seems like there's a lot of changes in leadership, but are people actually coming up through the system? So, because if you just keep on swapping heads in and out, but they're new people, it's, you know, it would be nice to see movement going up the system as well. The other thing was that still the damp and mould, and there's still a significant number of cases that are over 12 months. And I was just thinking, why don't we, I was just trying to work out how much it would cost to put positive pressure ventilation into every property. I think would cost about 4 million, something like that, because they're about £200 each, but then obviously it does the work as well. But it seems that we must be spending so much in officer time trying to sort out a lot of these damp and mould, and how much does it cost, the amount of time that you spend giving people advice when putting in a positive pressure ventilation system would, in most cases, just solve the problem. So I'm just wondering if we could maybe look at that as a kind of a rollout, that actually every building ought to have that. And as we're doing new builds, which are more energy efficient, they're going to need it anyway, because they're much more, you know, hermetically sealed.
Thank you, Councillor Gooch. And yeah, I mean, I really want to endorse your first point in particular. I think it sort of speaks to a kind of wider wider issue around the sort of the status and the attractiveness of the sector as somewhere that people, you know, people want to work. You know, and I think a long time ago I worked in reform of social work, making that a degree level qualification, and really sort of trying to raise up the status of social work as something that, you know, young people leaving education would want to go into. And I think we're sort of at a similar point with the housing sector now, that we need to do a lot more, I think, to make it attractive, to provide genuine career progression, and really to sort of help people to understand that this is a sector where you can really transform people's lives. It can be a incredibly exciting place to work, but yeah, we need to put the sort of the infrastructure in place to enable that. I'm going to ask David to respond.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. Absolutely right in terms of the importance of kind of culture and us really kind of seriously thinking about that in terms of what the opportunities are for colleagues to progress in terms of their career. In terms of satisfaction surveys, there's one recently been undertaken corporately, which will be able to identify the kind of housing kind of responses from that. So we're eagerly awaiting kind of that feedback and that information. It'll be important for us to reflect on that vis-a-vis the kind of wider transformation and kind of plans that we're putting in place to address, kind of continue the work to address the root cause kind of analysis that's set out there. Part of it is around kind of clear structures, I think. If people understand actually that they're kind of part of a clear kind of structure that's set out and there's clear kind of accountability throughout the structure, I think that's an important aspect of it as well, because I think in the past people have been unclear about that. There's been bottlenecks in terms of people being able to progress things through the kind of system, and the kind of frustration develops on the back of that. So part of that kind of senior management structure that's now being put in place is a kind of really important opportunity for people to be clear about kind of where they sit within the organisation and where they can escalate things and get kind of decisions made more quickly. I think the other really good opportunity for us is around the competency standard. Obviously, there's a kind of clear requirement for managerial positions to attain certain grades, certain levels, and all the rest. But actually, how are we using that more broadly to think about creating opportunities and thinking about succession planning, and for people to really see a kind of pathway through where they can be kind of aspirational in terms of their career and their trajectory and so on. So I think there's lots of things in play that will come together to kind of address the broader theme of culture that's been identified, that we're kind of really keen to push at as a wider management team. With regards to the specifics on damp and mould, I think what's important, and it's been referenced earlier in terms of the stock conditions survey, that will provide us a really good basis to understand more systematically and across the whole estate and all the different kind of homes that we manage as to what our kind of strategic interventions can be in this space to address more systematically the issues of damp and mould across people's homes than in the past, where it's been quite a reactive, chasing our tail sort of approach and dare I say it, sticking plaster. So I think the stock condition survey offers us, with regards to damp and mould, and in lots of other areas as well, actually, for us to think through actually what's our strategic investment, how do we really tackle some of these broader issues rather than just a kind of reactive approach. So we're getting there, and that kind of getting to the level that we're at now gives us a pretty good basis, but kind of furthering that throughout this year will give us a really good platform on which to make those decisions.
Thank you. Councillor Eddy.
Thank you for allowing me a second bite of the cherry jam. I was prompted to comment by Councillor Gooch's question of this question. Last October, I believe, I'm serving on the HR committee, and we received last autumn the outcome of the last year's staff survey. And for the first time, because we've had the new executive directorship, our service area was set out differently, and it appalled me that actually housing had the lowest response rate even lower than adult social care, which historically has been low. I forget what it was, but I think it was under 40%. And I determined then to actually raise when the permanent director, exec director came into being, that we should give it some consideration how we might be able to encourage participation for future years, from this year actually. I appreciate that it's purely voluntary thing, and Mr McNaughty can't be expected to sit on housing officers to force them to comply, but there are ways of encouraging them. The other thing I do recall, which surprised and alarmed me, there was a very high rate in housing of officers, far more than most of the council, when in fact most employees felt that actually their senior superiors were actually very much listening to them, or there was a two-way dialogue. A lack of a belief in that in housing. Now, I don't ascribe that necessarily to the individuals and the structure, because I believe the officers, for example, on the front pew here, row bench here, are fully committed to actually a participatory going forward. But there clearly is some problem in terms of actually the feedback we're getting. And so I'm just using Caroline Gucci's comment as a Trojan horse, a chance to raise this matter, and whether the exec director can look at this before this year's survey.
Thank you, Richard. David, would you like to respond?
So the survey was already in train as I joined. So we have certainly, as a management team, encouraged colleagues to return in a positive, non-threatening way. I'll clarify. And I think it is likely that we will be again towards the bottom in terms of the kind of response rate. But hopefully that will have shown some improvement on kind of previous years, because one of the things that was that colleagues wanted reassurance on was the kind of anonymity of the kind of responses, which in some ways is a reflection of kind of all of the other things that we're talking about here, and not a surprise in a way that people feel that way. So I think what's important though is obviously to encourage the participation, and then to genuinely have a kind of reflection, have a reflection on that in a kind of open and transparent way, reflecting Councillor Parsons' kind of earlier comments of the work of this committee, and that's what we want to see as a management team, that we are kind of open and transparent in terms of the issues and the challenges that we face, and that we are kind of seen to respond and act in line with that. But I would kind of reiterate the earlier point that part of this, to me, that's important is about kind of accountability in people's performance, and people feeling as though their kind of contribution is kind of recognised, and then where the performance of maybe kind of other colleagues across a team or a department isn't at the level that is being kind of challenged, and that is being kind of pushed forward, and that's the kind of culture that we want to create, which is one of kind of constructive hope and challenge in terms of people feeling that their contribution is valid, and it kind of matters the contribution that they make.
Thank you. Councillor Bales.
I've been unusually quiet, so I thought something's been playing on my mind about an answer that was given earlier about Awab's law to do with Dan's question. So my interpretation, my understanding of the answer that was given was that any cases that were reported before October, before this piece of law came into place, were kind of not dealt with as if it was in place. That's my understanding of what you said. But surely, if you know a piece of law or legislation or policy is incoming, any cases that are reported kind of leading up to that, you know that law is coming in, so you should be working towards putting that in place. So the answer you gave is, to me, it was like, well, imagine you were talking in medical sense. Oh, well, we couldn't do X because that diagnosis wasn't there. Well, that diagnosis, if someone was born with that condition, it's always been there. If that damp and mould has been there for years or decades or whatever, it's always been there. So to say that, oh, we couldn't do X because that law wasn't in place, when you know it's incoming. So that's my interpretation of the answer you gave. So I was just a bit confused about it. And also something different. So Caroline spoke about ventilation. What did you call it? Yeah. So, and you mentioned a figure of installing it. Yeah. Well, in B&Q, one of those units costs £200. Yeah. But have you factored in, so whenever the council installs anything into our council homes, I've been a council tenant for over 20 years, I've moved numerous times, so when they put something in, if they then upgrade it or maintain it or it becomes obsolete, quite often they don't take it away. I've got some kind of air ventilation system thing that's obsolete in my attic, and I have no idea when it was installed, so you know, it's okay given a figure to say this is how much it would cost to install them, but you also have to factor in maintenance and, you know, removing it, because I've got this pipes everywhere in my attic with this thing that does nothing, when I'd rather have the space in my attic for ventilation in my attic. So, but yeah, I just wanted some more clarification on the answer to make sure I understood what you said.
Thank you, Kerry and Caroline. And of course, happy for members of the committee to discuss with each other. But of course, as before, please go through the chair. And Caroline, you didn't have your mic on actually then, so you might so people who are watching online won't have heard what you said. I don't know if you'd like to briefly repeat what you said so that we have that for the record.
No, I was saying that if you wanted to buy one of these units yourself and put it in your house, it costs about £200 and you can get them at B&Q. But obviously there's then the putting it in. I don't know what the life of them is. I've had one in my property now for about 8 years. It seems to be working fine. It's quite small. But yes, you do have the pipe work. But yeah, I mean, there would be an ongoing cost as well.
Great, thank you. And David, would you like to respond?
So the answer earlier was in relation to AWAB's law and reporting against, rather than the prioritisation of damp and mould repairs. So damp and mould repairs prior to that were being dealt with in terms of the priority that was assigned to the repair as it was raised and came into the council. So it wasn't at all any kind of reflection on the importance and priority of damp and mould repairs and damp and mould works. It was in response to reporting against the now legal requirement in terms of AWAB's law. So apologies if I gave the impression that prior to that point the council wasn't dealing and treating with those repairs with the kind of urgency that was required. It's just more how we are now required to report against now that that law has come in place.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you. I mean, when we're looking at the kind of that dashboard on page 53, it does look like there is kind of generally steady progress. On the decent home standards, we've had that kind of dip from, you know, it went down from 92% down to suddenly it dropped to 77%, and that presumably was because of better data capture rather than because a lot of houses suddenly got worse. I'm curious whether the kind of the improvement from December from 72% of properties meeting decent home standards up to 83% is what you would consider to be a real improvement in properties meeting the decent home standard. So that would be my first question. I think on the damp and mould, this kind of half kind of comes back to each meeting. if we could have some sort of positioning statement on damp and mould management and on the what is the approach that's going to really sort this problem out, so that we're not sort of half discussing it at each meeting that we come to. That would be really good. So I think if that could be that kind of what is the approach to damp and mould, how quickly do we think we might be able to see some significant improvements? If that could come back as a kind of standalone piece of work into this committee, I think that could be really helpful. And if, you know, pressure items at £200 a piece can make a difference, fantastic. And again, getting that overview, we've got that really useful RAG dashboard on page 53, but we haven't got the NEC weaknesses sitting in there. So we've sort of got we've almost got a sort of one-page overview, because you've got the RAG ratings on page 53, and then you've got the status, you know, the status report on page I can't see the page, page 60, where it just shows red, 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 which feels like that's far too pessimistic an analysis of where we are, and it's not, you know, and it's got the NEC details on there, but that really useful RAG rating on page 53 doesn't have it. So I think being able to have a kind of one-stop RAG rating overview and a sense of when do we think we're going to be on track with this? Because it does feel like there's a lot of good progress. Red, red, red does not reflect the reality of the situation, which feels like there's lots of good progress on the ground, but still some way to go. So, thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Richard.
Thank you. Right, I'll answer those questions in order. So first, I suppose first about the RAG rating. Yeah, they're measuring slightly different things. It's very complicated that we've got the page 53 is the landlord compliance dashboard. So that's measuring sort of business as usual performance. So how we're doing on a day-to-day basis with our landlord compliance activity. And that's very much driven by the percentage compliance. The table in the appendix on page 60, I take your point, red, red, red does seem very negative. That is assessing the position of the programme rather than business as usual, and that is very much a point in time. So that was informed by slightly different things. So that was informed significantly by not fully completing milestone 2. Because we didn't achieve that, we're not in compliance with the Housing Consumer Standards Improvement Strategy, because that timeline was due to be December. So that's very much that's driving that red. This is why we are refreshing the programme now. So what comes to July won't just show glaring red, because we will have done that refresh. So really that's just a point in time to be sort of as transparent as possible about where the programme is at that point. I think regarding the decent homes percentage compliance, and your point about is that improvement in activity out within residents' homes, or is it around data? I think at this point it's mainly driven by certainly stock condition survey is providing better, more accurate data. So that is definitely improving that data position. It's not necessarily significantly being driven by improvements that are going on right now in people's homes. It's being driven by better data that we're finding. Also, you identified that it's gone from 72 a couple of months ago to 82 now. That is mainly driven by the treatment of certain decent homes criteria within the new NEC system. So the main driver behind that is the treatment of boilers. So when it classed 72, there was a wrong treatment of boilers. So what it said is it was measuring an age against an expiry date for boilers, basically, which is, I think it was 15 years. And if a boiler was over 15 years, it was saying it's failed, when the that's that's not a treatment that most housing organisations use. Now, if a property has an adequate gas safety certificate and the boiler is working, it should be treated as compliant. So that's that main shift between the 72 and the 83.
Apologies. I'm not seeing any further hands, so I'm going to move us on. And I'm going to read out the recommendations for this report, which are that the Homes and Housing Delivery Committee notes the Housing Consumer Standards Programme update in Section 1, the External Consumer Standards Review report findings in Section 2, the External Strategic Root Cause and Lessons Learned Review 12 months on report findings in Section 3, the March 2026 Landlord Compliance Performance Report in Section 4, the Residents' Voice update in Section 5, and the update from the latest regulatory review meetings with the Regulator of Social Housing in Section 6. So please note that report, everyone. Thank you. Okay, next up, we've got the Resident Voice Strategy for 2026 to 28, and this is item 11. So this report presents and seeks approval of the Resident Voice Strategy for 2026 to 28. And the officer recommendations can be found on page 126 in your pack. I'm going to invite Mark Kempt, who is Head of Housing Management and Estates, to briefly outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. This report presents the Resident Voice Strategy for 2026 to 2028, which seeks your approval today. At its core, this strategy sets out how we will strengthen the way we listen to, understand and act on what our residents tell us. It reflects a clear commitment to ensuring that residents' voice is not only heard, but it is influential in shaping our services and our priorities. The strategy is being developed in direct response to the recommendation of the committee's Task and Finish Group on resident engagement, which was carried out last year, alongside input from our resident and community panel. I would like to thank those residents who took part in the creation of the strategy for their contribution and time. The strategy also responds to our Housing Consumer Standards Programme. Importantly, this is a practical and accessible strategy written for residents with a strong focus on inclusivity, transparency and accountability. It commits us to reducing barriers to engagement, improving how we feed back to residents, and embed a culture across our housing services that values learning, openness and continuous improvement. As the largest social landlord in Bristol, it is essential that our residents are heard, respected and are able to influence the services they receive. This strategy will help to ensure that the resident voice is central to everything we do, and it will sit alongside our asset management strategy, which will come to this committee in July. My thanks to Imogen, housing colleagues, and most importantly, our residents who shape this strategy.
Great, thanks very much. I'd also like to add my own thanks as well, because obviously this report very much comes out of the work of the Task and Finish group that we had last year. So thank you very much to Councillor Shabalala for chairing that, and for the other members of that group, many of whom are sat in this room now. It really is, a very kind of direct through line from that, and it really does speak to the conversations that we were having earlier about culture. This is not just about how we communicate with our residents. This is about really transforming everything that we do so that there is a direct line, as a direct kind of loop between what our residents' lived experience is and then what they tell us about that, what they ask us to do, through many different routes and different forums, and then how we actually respond to that and demonstrate that we're responding to it. It really is about a sort of transformation from a sort of traditional kind of paternalistic model, really, of delivering housing services to one that is absolutely about centering the voices and experiences of our residents. I'm going to open up to questions and comment. I'm going to start with Councillor Bales.
As I said earlier, I've been a council tenant for over 20 years, so I've seen things come and go, and I was actually a resident rep on the Housing Management Board for a few years, and then I was elected and sat on it under that, and then it was just scrapped, and I don't really know why it was scrapped, and so I'm wondering what the difference is. And this seems, it's not a criticism, I think this is really great. Who doesn't want a user-led service led by users? You know, all this work seems really amazing, but why scrap one scheme and then replace it with this? Could the old scheme not have been changed or made different or improved, or things added or taken away? What, I don't understand why one thing was scrapped and you've brought this in. And also estate walkabouts, we get invited as councillors, and as much as I would absolutely love to go as a resident or a councillor, I was invited by housing officers, and then they kind of, one emailed and said, oh, we don't think you ought to go on this one. You might get accosted on the doorstep. Well, I'm a politician, I kind of know how to handle that. I'm not bothered by being accosted on the doorstep. It's nothing I haven't had before. And then other feedback from residents, so they were well advertised, I think, and some residents really wanted to go along, but they were either cancelled, didn't happen, or the officers weren't where they should have been, or where the residents thought they were at the time. One resident who isn't a council tenant but wanted to speak to officers about a particular issue, just couldn't find them, couldn't engage with them. So is that a really effective way for those situations to kind of feed into officers and the housing team in general? Is there a better way for those situations to be approached? So I think this is amazing and it's really great, but I'm just a bit confused why we have this after the Housing Management Board.
Thank you, Kerry. I'm going to ask Fiona to come in on that, and there's a couple of sort of really important points there. I think one is I think it'd be worth having a bit of discussion around the new resident community panel and why we think that that's a stronger, really, a more appropriate model for the structure that we have now. And also something around sort of good practice around those estate walkabouts and the work that we're looking to do over on those over the next few months.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just come in before my colleague does. I think we're all rushing to respond. So, in terms of why scrap the Housing Management Board, the previous way of our previous approach, I think we've all recognised some of the discussions today have talked about sort of what's running through all of our discussions has been the need for change, and the need to continue to evolve and to continue to respond to our residents. So that's really at the centre of it. Actually, the Housing Management Board the desire is for it to be representative in its widest way of all of the residents that we serve and we work for across the city. And unfortunately, it just wasn't. And it's difficult because we recognise that the reality is we're struggling with the same challenge that lots of other social housing providers struggle with, and that is that our residents don't necessarily all want to engage by coming to meetings. So it's really difficult to hear residents' voices. So this approach really started at the point that how do we engage more readily with residents? How do we ensure that we get a more diverse and representative group of residents involved with the organisation? And if we can't just rely on our residents who don't necessarily want to all engage, what are the organisations and stakeholders that we know our residents regularly attend and go to, that we hear from, and how can we allow our residents' voices to be heard with and through those organisations? So that was kind of the route for coming together with a new approach that looks at how we can hear as many voices as is possible, and recognising that not all of our residents will want to become involved. So therefore, how can we work with stakeholders and key organisations that we know we often advocate for our residents? So that's the sort of background, if hopefully that answers that. So just to move on to walkabouts. neighbourhood and estate walkabouts. My bugbear, I will say, because it has been something that we've absolutely struggled to embed across my service and across Mark's service, and we've sort of started, and I think what you're reflecting is something that wasn't working well. So we started the approach, but it really wasn't embed because we hadn't managed to get the service to buy into it. And to be absolutely honest, if I'm really honest and reflective, at the same time as we were doing that, we had really started to step up the work around compliance and the activities there. We were also asking officers to do lots of work around person-centred fire risk assessments and all of that really important work around safety. And they were being pulled from pillar to post. We are now in, as we've heard through the feedback that's been given by Richard, we're now in a far more stable state. There's been lots of work done by Mark Kempt and Mark Goody, the two Marks that work in that service. And you're about to see any day now, and I think Mark will be able to give us the dates, of the relaunch of the approach, because we recognise the way that we'd set up the walkabouts and estate and neighbourhood grading previously wasn't quite fit for purpose, because what we had done was kind of apply a one-state approach, when really what we need to recognise is that we have estates that are quite close, high-rise blocks, and we also have neighbourhoods where we've got lots of council houses on a number of different streets, and we need slightly different approaches, and it would be really useful to give far better feedback about the new approach that's about to launch. I will stop there. Thank you, Chair.
I think Mark wanted to come in as well.
Yeah, just on the Housing Management Board, I think the other thing was it was affiliated with the previous system. So when we moved to a committee system, that model was defunct, really. So the resident community panel, which I'll provide an update on in a minute, is that replacement, and that was another reason why. Onto the estate, walkabouts grading, yes, that was rushed last year, if I'm being brutally honest. This year we've got a more proactive approach. There will be communications going out to all ward councillors, informing them of when they will be taking place so that you can attend. There has been a lot of work around the kind of feedback loop. So when we did go out, we picked up a load of issues, but we didn't respond back to residents about what we were doing about that. So, you know, even if you attended, you probably wouldn't have known what was happening off the back of it. So that's a key takeaway for us. The other point is that these estate gradings and walkabouts will set the priorities for our neighbourhood plans, which is part of the Housing Consumer Standard. So we're trying to dovetail it all in, really, because we know it's what our residents want. They want us visible, they want us out and about, but we also need to make sure we're capturing that information and doing something about it so that we can provide transparency around the fact that you've said this and we've done X off the back of it. So there will be more information coming out next month, June, which is when this will start. But I've asked that all ward councillors are told when the walkabouts will be happening to give you an opportunity to attend.
Thanks. Councillor Shabalala.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks for bringing this report over. I think this is a victory for our residents, that finally there is a very clear process of engagement, that the loophole of feedback has also got a process to it. It is not a bespoke approach. And I think that is really, really fantastic. I was on the Housing Management Board as a council tenant in temporary accommodation during lockdown and stayed for about 3 years before becoming a councillor. So I've seen the transformation from the board to where things are now. And I'm saying, you know, I think the team has done a fantastic piece of work. Now I see it also in action when I look at the estate walkarounds with the housing officer, with the police, with our community anchor organizations, going around each of the estates and looking at what needs to be done and when, with a group, I might say, of residents also involved. And this is a demonstration of action and visible action in place. And I think that is the fundamental element that tenants have been asking for forever and a day. Now, I think what's been fantastic about this is that it's also been wrapped together with the upgrading of our service level agreements, which contractualizes our partners in parks and waste and everything else to really have a joint-up approach in how we're dealing with estates. However, what I am disappointed about is we need to deal more with third-party contractors to make sure that they understand the standards that you have set, and when they are doing those repairs, they know what good looks like, because some of the complaints that we have is mainly about third-party contractors. And that's not the council, but it's the council's responsibility. So I think we need to see something along that line. Secondly, I'd like to see a co-designed process for the complaints process to ensure that our resident and community panel has got a way in designing that approach, because as several report highlighted, it is probably our Achilles heel. And lastly, I think the report touches on everything, but one part I'd like to see more on is a budget attached to this. Why? Because we do need staff members. Maybe they go on additional time to go and be involved in the area forums and do resident meetings in the evening, or travel arrangements. Maybe we need to have more stronger communication power in terms of marketing or communicating what's happening in our estates. I think the fact that this report comes with a nil budget, I think maybe it's up to, in terms of a response from yourself, Mark, do you think this adds additional pressure to the staff? Or by having a budget where there's dedicated staff that supports this overall piece would actually relieve some staff with something else? Do you think it does need a budget line? Because zero for the work that you're doing and what comes from residents, I'm not sure.
Thank you, Tibbs. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take more money. Don't worry about that. I think what this does is it sets out our approach, right, and our expectation from our colleagues about how to engage with residents, fundamentally. I'm going to quote my boss on this. We have a lot of resource. I'm not entirely sure we use it as best we can. So that's a challenge for me and my team to operate under. We do have a resident engagement team and budget, which Alicia manages. But for me, this is more about how we use our operational services better to communicate with residents. So that would be my response. With regards to the point around complaints, it absolutely is a failure. And as part of the transformation work that we'll be doing, that will be a major piece of that work. And I'd be happy to provide an update once that comes through. And yes, I would like our resident and community panel engaged in those conversations and what that will look like in the future. So I will take that away as an action and a commitment.
Great, thanks. Councillor Eddy.
Before addressing the actual report here before us today, I'd like just to add a footnote to what Mark Verna responded to Councillor Bells on the H&B. One advantage of being the most experienced member here is I was usually here a decade ago when things happened, or 2 decades ago, or even 3 decades ago. And I had the privilege of being the Tory rep on the HMB since when Councillor John Keeley founded it in, I believe, 2008. Interestingly, Chairman, he represented your seat of Easton too. To be honest, it was very much of its time, as the officers have said, designed as an appropriate entry for tenants and leaseholders' concerns when we had the leader and cabinet style of governance, of course, not as we do now. And frankly, it's, in my view, not just the mayoral in comparison with the mayoral model, but with leader and cabinet. This is far more transparent than it was in those days. and it does take, as we've heard, current best advice and practice. And I think I'm encouraged very much by the residents' voice strategy we see. So I don't have any hesitations. It was of its time and we have moved on. And I believe the current systems, let's give it a try. This is actually an interim strategy for 2 years, and my thanks to Leisha and Imogen for the work they've done in it. I'm sure actually we'll discover in those 2 years we need to tweak this and add to that, etc. So I wouldn't be, I would flag up issues, that's fair enough. But I do believe we're on a journey and we hopefully will improve on this. But it is a very good document and a very good piece of work, so congratulations.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Goggin.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of points. The walkabouts, I know, obviously there was a historical issue. There even was, I think, some industrial action over the whole site visits and how much people were expected to do. Do you think that reluctance is gone now, and is that perhaps because the staffing levels have got better?
Thank you, Chair. So if I'm completely honest, it isn't staffing levels. It was, I think it goes back to culture. It's a resistance to change. So, and the team have been on a real journey. So it's a resistance of change because really we needed to empower our staff to feel that they can make a difference. And that's where some of the service level agreement things come in, and being able to track that, because it can feel very relentless. But I think initially the resistance was, oh, we don't do that. It is very common, you know, it wasn't a housing association thing, as I was told. You know, local authorities across the land all do walkabouts. It was just I think it was a bit of a Bristolism. But the staff have been, it's the same staff, generally the same numbers. We've added a few managers and a few specific housing officers who deal with our more vulnerable residents, just to support there. But I think it really is about empowering and that cultural shift. And they've been on a real journey. There's still a way to go, but they're really quite positive. They are really responsive to the needs of residents, because at the core of it all, the one thing that I am sure of is that every member of the team, they all want to do a good job. So they're just on that journey.
Thank you. And perhaps you guys are taking a bit less credit than you should. If it's not staffing levels, then it must be management. So there you go. And I know that COVID obviously played a role as well, because everyone got used to staying at home. And I think that probably contributed to it as well. The second one, if I can read my own writing, planned works. Do you think that when residents get notified about planned works that are going to happen and they think imminently, and then they don't happen or they're cancelled? I mean, for example, in the last year, I've been told my house was going to be painted, and then it wasn't, and then I was going to have my windows replaced, and now I'm not. And I wouldn't have been upset if I hadn't received those notifications telling me I was going to do it. So is there a lack of communication between who's responsible for sending out those letters and the realism of where we are financially and in every other aspect?
Thanks, Paul. Who would like to respond on that?
Thank you, Chair. I think I will. So I think it's about, and this is why this document's really important, because this isn't just a message out to our residents, it's a message inward to colleagues about the importance of communication and how we communicate. So we shouldn't be doing that. That's a failure on our part, and we have to accept that. And we need to communicate the why. So sometimes we will have to change the direction of travel. There may be really valid reasons for why we can no longer do a particular piece of planned work. It's about how we communicate. And that has in the past been something that's missing. So this document, you know, the next piece of work for the team really, and we've talked about this, we've started to talk about this, is how do we bring this to life? And what difference does it make to the way that we approach our residents and our tenants and how we engage with them? And that's the key. That's what will tell us whether this is successful. And Mark and Leisha and the team are really focused on how do we manage success? How do we know what's the difference? Does it feel? How does it feel? And it talks in here, one of the 4 objectives about how does it feel for our residents? Does it feel different?
Thank you. And Mark.
Thank you. And as one of your residents, I'd have to say that I'm being filled with more confidence as I hear more.
Thank you, Paul. I think Mark would like to add a bit to that as well.
Yeah, it was just on the point of communication and letters, and it's like we were having a conversation yesterday about all of this, and one of the things that I've set out to my managers and my team is if it's not statutory or legislative, change it. You know, I'm empowering my teams to change stuff that doesn't work. With NEC, I know there's been some issues with the implementation, but it does afford us an opportunity to review that communication and what we use. So, for example, do we need to send a letter? Can we send you a text message? Can we use like warm call handling software to be able to tell you about stuff that's going on? So it's a challenge back for us to really use the resources that we have, going back to that point, and using them more effectively, because also there's, without wanting to ramble on a bit, there's also costs associated to all of this. So without sending you those 2 letters, you know, we use a text message, we can reinvest that money into other places. So I would say as part of this strategy, there's also a challenge for services to look at how they communicate and what's the most effective way of doing that, and listening to what residents are telling us and being able to reflect that in what we do.
Thanks very much. Okay, Councillor Thomas.
What the reports look good coming out of those meetings, and the actions look good. Will there be a sort of reporting suite associated with this in terms of these are the number of walkabouts that have taken place across the estate? Because I hear very much Sibs's kind of positive view of things, and obviously he's had a key leadership role. But you know, if Kerry in Hartcliffe has a very different experience, how are we making sure that we've got a kind of consistency of experience across the city, and how we're reporting against that? So it's the kind of the translation of this very good initiation into practice. I've got a second question as well.
Mark.
Thanks. A couple of things. So the resident voice is a reporting tool. We've developed a reporting function that feeds in information from complaints, satisfaction surveys, and also resident engagement pieces that come through. So there's a separate reporting that we're designing through a Power BI report that will capture that. With regards to the point around estate walkabouts, what I would like longer term, and this will be an aspirational thing, is I would like that sat in NEC so we can provide those reports. I think for this first iteration of walkabouts, that'll have to sit separately somewhere else, but longer term I would like it within the system so we can export out. So we will be able to report how many we've done and what those 3 priorities are for each of the mini patches. But long term, I do want to see what capacity we've got within the housing management system to put that in there so that it's all in one place.
And Jeremy had a second question.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we've got issues that are being identified, I've got a slight concern that if we're paying people to be on the panel and we as a council are selecting those people, that we might be choosing people who we know are going to be more friendly towards us. and actually we know if they're going to then start being difficult, oh, you're not going to get paid for attending this anymore. So I'm just wondering how we kind of make sure that we're listening to the awkward squad as well as the people that we're happy to pay to be on this panel.
Thanks. I don't think you've met the panel yet, have you?
Yeah, just to come, I mean, they're professionally challenging. They challenge us, yeah, absolutely. And I'm well up for that, you know what I mean? That is ultimately, as I've said to my team, they pay our wages, you know, so we absolutely have to be listening to what they're saying and doing something about that. But I can assure you that that was not and has not been part of the process. And we have really transparent and open conversations about the issues that affect them. And I think personally it's worked very well. But that's just my opinion, and it'll be up to the residents to tell us what they think.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bales. Oh, sorry, Alicia would like me to come in.
Hello,
Alicia, could you
Wilson.
introduce yourself as well? Thank you.
Alicia Wilson, Policy and Engagement Manager. I just wanted to pick up on a point and provide assurance that there is absolutely no connection between payment and people's attitudes and how they challenge us on the panel. We have a payment for involvement policy. We've always paid residents for expenses, but first time we're doing payment. And it's not just for this panel. In the interest of fairness, we've branched that across to the Housing Scrutiny Panel as well, so they benefit from those payment options. We try to make the selection as transparent as possible, so it's not just my team that selects people, and it's definitely not senior leadership that selects them either. We work in partnership with community development so we've got a more objective view. Going forward, however, there may be more opportunities to strengthen that recruitment by involving some residents. It's the first time that we've done this, so I think as we move forward, there may be opportunities to sort of make that selection process fairer across the board and a bit more objective.
Thank you. Councillor Bales.
You just half answered my question. So you mentioned about engagement through community development, and I think they're an amazing team. They really do build positive relationships with communities like mine. But I also wanted to ask if you because I know Caring in Bristol, which is just up the road, they do outreach and they do tenant-led meetings and drop-ins, early doors and co-production. So does all of that also feed in? Because I know the lady that runs the sessions in my ward, and I think she does some stuff in Southmead, and every time I bump into her, she kind of gives me a brief update on how all that's going. But she also says, I've emailed so-and-so in the council, I've emailed this person, and they're not getting back to me. And I'll happily take it on as casework and chase it up for her. But she is very experienced in what she does, and she's got good relationship with those tenants and stuff. So it shouldn't, it shouldn't have to come through me. So I just wanted to make sure that those voices aren't being ignored and it is being fed in through them.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Caring at Bristol is one of our resident and community panel members. On our agenda, we have a standing item which we call Community Notice Board. And so there is opportunity at each meeting for them to raise any issues about things that are coming through their drop-ins or from their clients to escalate them and give them sight through the panel. And the panel is always attended by senior members of our management team. So there is opportunities to feed that in. I know the issue that you're talking about, and I have asked for a response to be given. So I'll chase that up when I leave here and see what's happening with that particular case. My team also work collaboratively with Black South West Network and on community drop-ins as well. So we've got sort of community drop-ins where we're working in partnership with, and then we've got community drop-ins that are obviously resident-led and VCS-led. And so I think we probably need to do some work to make sure that regardless of which way round that drop-in works, that the voices still come in and that they're still being heard. So I'll take that on board.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, everybody. Okay, I'm going to move on to the recommendations for this report then. So the officer recommendation is that the Homes and Housing Delivery Committee approves the Resident Voice Strategy 2026-28 at Appendix A1. So I'd like to move that recommendation. May I have a seconder, please?
Can I second?
Thank you very much, Councillor Reddy. So I'm now going to move to the vote. And when voting, please could you indicate your vote clearly by raising your hand. First of all, could I have votes for the recommendations, please? And that is unanimous. Thank you, everybody, very much. So that concludes that item, and we're going to move on to our final item, which is agenda item 12, the progress update on the resident and community panel. This report provides an update on the establishment, development and ongoing work of the Resident and Community Panel for Housing. It summarises progress against agreed objectives, outlines the engagement approach, highlights early activities and next steps to strengthen resident involvement in shaping our housing services. It's for information only, and the recommendations can be found on page 165. I'm going to ask Mark Kempt again to outline the report. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides an update on the early development and progress of the Housing, Resident and Community Panel, which was established to strengthen how residents influence housing services, decisions and performance. The panel was created to replace the previous Housing Management Board and to ensure we meet the transparency, influence and accountability standard by giving residents meaningful opportunities to shape the services we provide and to hold us to account. Since recruitment concluded in November last year, we have brought together a diverse group of residents and community representatives from across the city. Following inductions and training, the panel is now fully operational. Our residents are actively engaged in structured panel meetings, co-design workshops and working groups, contributing in key areas such as the resident voice strategy, customer service standards, estate walkabouts and digital accessibility. We need to continue to build trust with the panel by demonstrating real service improvements and maintain momentum with them. Next week, we will commence recruitment for an independent chair with communications being launched, and we are aiming to have a chair in place ahead of our next panel meeting in September. I would like to personally thank all the members of the panel for their contributions and continued dialogue with me, and I look forward to continuing to work with the panel to progress change and improve services for them.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'd just like to say, from my own point of view as well, you know, I've been quite closely involved in the establishment of this panel, and I've met the members, and I attend as an observer wherever I can, and they really are a really diverse and representative group of people. They're I would say extremely mindful of the role that they play, and they are they're not a group of people that would be satisfied with anything less than, you know, really excellent service. You know, they really are very, very engaged with improving everything that we do. And we're really on a journey with that group of people, I think, aren't we, as well? So I'm really pleased with the progress that's been made so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, where it leads us as well. I'm going to open up for questions and comment. I'm going to start with Councillor Bales.
So thank you for that information about the panel. So my question is, how were they appointed? Was there a selection, an election, and how representative is it of the whole city? Because obviously in my ward there are a lot more council housing than at other parts of the city. So are there more from my ward, or, you know, is there, how is that 14 made up? And I also had some points to make about the Equalities Impact Assessment appendix. So it's got some really good information on there taken from the Quality of Life survey. Percentage satisfied with the cost of their rent or mortgage, satisfied with their overall accommodation, and that's really useful information. And each box goes through all the equalities: Bristol average, 10% most deprived, 16 to 24, 65 years and older, ethnicity, disabled, LGBT, and then the final box on each one says no qualifications. So I just wondered why that was in there. As an uneducated person, I have no education. I've got a level 2 childcare qualification. So that really stood out for me. So is that really equalities related? Why is that in there?
Thanks very much, Kerry. Yeah, I think it would be really helpful actually to sort of describe a bit how that how residents were recruited to that panel, because it's a really important part of how it was established, and I think it sort of speaks to the sort of the philosophy behind it as well. You know, this is not about electing representatives or anything like that. This is not about people sort of having to feel like they speak for an entire community, that what they can bring is their own lived experience, and that is that's the gold that really sort of informs everything that panel does, and by extension increasingly everything that we do as in the service. But Leisha, would you like to respond on that?
Yeah. So the panel members, so we put an open recruitment out to tenants and leaseholders, saying that we wanted people to apply if they were interested. We took an approach where we based our approach based on values. So we wanted people who were passionate about their community, passionate about making change, not just for themselves, but for their neighbours. And we really had a good representation. I think we had just under 30 people apply. And they just had to give us a page of why they wanted to join and what they felt they would get out of it. In terms of selection, they did go through a sort of informal chat with a panel. And the result, and I'm happy to share this afterwards, because it's a low number of residents, it's quite difficult to share profile and information because you can be identifiable. But what I can say is that we did monitor where people were coming from, where they lived across the city, what areas. And we also did a bit of equalities profiling. And I am pleased to say, not intentionally, but we have got people from right across the city. And so when we mapped that out, we were quite impressed that we have got people from inner city areas, we've got people from South Bristol, North Bristol, so we have got good representation. We've also got good representation in terms of age. It's the first time in a long time that we've had a panel that is representative of different age groups, working age and people who are retired and younger. So I can share some of that information with you. I'm happy to do that. But yeah, I think we've got a good mix of people on the panel with good experience and people who are involved, as you mentioned earlier on, in other things in their community as well. So they know their communities and their neighbours quite well. So yeah, we're really proud of that. And so we're hoping to maintain that as we move forward. In response to the equalities impact assessment, I haven't quite spotted the section where it says about no qualifications. What I can say, though, is that we didn't ask people to be qualified to be on the panel. Their qualification was that they were a tenant or leaseholder and that they have lived experience of such and accessing our services. And there was no requirement for any sort of qualification at all. In terms of formal qualifications, if that makes sense. In my experience, it doesn't matter if you're a tenant for a year or for 15 years, your experience of how you access the service and what your home feels like is just as important. So I'll look into the issue that you talked about, Councillor Bales, in relation to qualifications on here. It might be an oversight on my part, but certainly from our perspective, there is no requirement for people to be qualified to take part in a panel in terms of academic or any other formal qualifications.
Thank you. Councillor Eddy.
A quick question for Mark Kemp. Mark, I know we've spoken, or Councillor Parsons and I have spoken to you before about the need to maximise the likelihood of recruiting an experienced, wide-ranging housing person, but who is genuinely independent. How are we proposing to do that in our recruitment?
Yeah, The proposal is that we're going to go out to registered providers in the South West, because what we would like is someone who is a housing professional, ideally. So what we'll do is we'll use our own professional networks to do that. We'll also get something out corporately as well. And that essentially is what we're going to do, is just a call out really. And we're hopeful that we will be able to find someone who is interested in this, because it's a really great opportunity to shape services for residents and Bristol. So that's the proposal.
Right, thanks. And Mark, could you talk a little bit about the involvement of residents in that recruitment process as well? Because I think that's important.
Yeah, so once we get sort of applications back, the panel will actively be involved in that recruitment process. So we haven't actually set out what that'll be, but they will absolutely be involved in the recruitment. And they have been, I think they're involved in David's appointment. So we're using the panel and representatives as part of our overall recruitment for senior management as well.
Great, thank you. One thing that I'd like to add as well is that obviously I'm very keen for the resident and community panel to be able to engage with this committee as well. So that's something that we're looking to find a way of making that work down the line as sort of part of that journey with the panel of giving them the opportunity really to sort of make their voice heard and sort of and to make change at the highest level. This is the place where we make the big key decisions, and that panel should be able to feel like they can influence us. Councillor Goggin.
Yeah, perhaps we can just make sure they all get an invite to the meetings here, because the website is it's the website. So, it's not always that accessible to people. They don't know when the meetings are or where they are and that kind of thing. And perhaps they'd like to come along.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Yeah, great. I don't see any further hands. So I think we may be done with that item. So I'm just going to read out the officer recommendations then, if that's okay with everyone. So they are that the Homes and Housing Delivery Committee notes the progress of the Resident and Community Panel for Housing. Could I ask the committee to note that report, please? Thank you. So that concludes today's meeting. I'd like to thank absolutely everybody for your attendance, members, officers, those who were in the public gallery, and anyone who's watching online. The next meeting of this committee will be held at 10 a.m. on Friday, the 17th of July. Thank you very much.